Alright, yeah, I get it. I haven't uploaded in a while, but don't worry, that's because I've been working on some pretty big stuff. You can check my Patreon for more info, but for now, let's get to it. We are on to episode 2. For those who are new here, this series is just going through a bad anime episode by episode and figuring out what makes it so awful. Anime. The group is heading to deliver a letter to the royal capital. The girls comment on how they didn't take the quicker job of hunting slimes because slimes are gross and can sometimes melt clothes. We get treated to this visual. They find a samurai girl named Yai beating up some thugs. She gets distracted by hunger, so the gang joins the fight. They run away with her, she's hungry, so they treat her to food, which she eats a lot of. Yai's motivation is revealed. She wants to become a better fighter. She joins the party. It's revealed Toya can use any magic, including all null magic. He tries out some random spells. A super sense spell allows him to smell blood. They check it out and end up fighting some lizard men controlled by a hooded mage. This is going to sound like complete whiplash, because it is, but all of a sudden we learn that one of the lizard men shot some girl's butler and Lin can't heal him. Sad violins play as she bawls her eyes out. Toya pulls the arrow out of his chest with magic so Lin can heal him. Except, he heals him instead. The girl is Lady Sushi? She's the daughter of a duke. Her butler is Liam. They need to explain to Toya what a duke is and how important of a title it is. Clearly this boy does not read Otome isekais. He doesn't bow to her and talks to her like he would anyone, something she's fine with. They ask to be escorted to the capital. The Duke and her have a heartfelt reunion. The Duke is very grateful towards our protagonists. While Toya and the Duke talk, Sushi comes in and tells the Duke she didn't tell what happened to Ellen. Ellen is revealed to be the Duke's wife, who's very sick and holed up in a room. Apparently, her mom's father had a powerful healing spell, and Sushi was out adventuring to go find secrets relating to it. Only Sushi can use it because it's null magic, or at least only Sushi could theoretically use it because null magic is hereditary, but she can't use it herself. However, since Toya can use any null magic, he heals the wife. The girls all start praising Toya. The Duke gives him 2 rewards for saving Sushi and his wife. The first is a bunch of money. The other is an official recognition of the Duke, which will grant them access to just about anyone. Yai tells Toya she's going to offer herself to him, by which she means she will follow him as a traveling companion, but her wording causes a comedic misunderstanding. They all become a team. Alright, let's get into the analysis. Let's start with story structure. Now, if we want to analyze this episode generously, we'd say that it follows the 5-act story structure, in which it builds up to a climactic midpoint before following the aftermath of that midpoint to a conclusion. The reason this fits is because of the fact that the most interesting thing happens halfway through the episode, and that everything after that is boring filler. That being said, this is just an excuse. What's really happening here is what I described in my series on Skeleton Knight in Another World. This is a power fantasy story, and power fantasies are built on a particular relationship between the protagonist and dramatic conflicts. Dramatic conflicts involve the invoking of tension followed by its resolution. An enemy appears, hope seems scarce, but then the heroes find a way to beat it and triumph. Power fantasies are defined by focusing most of the story on the triumph part. We see that within this episode. A problem appears just for Toya to solve it, and then people praise Toya for solving the problem, and then we do it again, but worse. I really want you to soak in the fact that this story's idea of raising the stakes for the final act was to introduce a problem which is more difficult, but less urgent, and since Toya can solve both with no issue, it's only less urgent. The tension decidedly declines as the story goes on. Power fantasies can be done right. In episode 2 of Code Geass, our protagonist Lelouch was witnessing a group of rebels fighting back against a government that he also hated. The rebels are in a tough spot, but with Lelouch's help they are able to wreck house. Lelouch isn't threatened until much later in the episode. This part is pure indulgence, but they don't just let that stand on its own. The fact Lelouch is completely trouncing these people is utilized by the narrative in order to build a distinct relationship between the hero and the supporting cast, to thoroughly characterize the people involved, to build up Lelouch's heroic ethos as a theatrical, mysterious strategist, to further explore his relationship with the government he is fighting against, and to set up for moments later in the episode where he meets his match. This moment where Toya saves Sushi, what is done with that? Basically nothing. His heroic ethos as a guy who helps people is reinforced, but it didn't need reinforcing. And that stake is just further hammered in by the time spent praising him for it. It does establish he can use null magic, but we knew that. It starts a relationship with Lady Sushi, but that's really the most that gets done, and so it takes no time at all. Power fantasies often cut out the part where the hero struggles, either saving it for later or forsaking it entirely. This is a part of the story with significant importance, but no longer being shackled to it gives you the opportunity to do things you otherwise wouldn't have the room for. But the show doesn't see this as an opportunity, it sees it as an aesthetic trapping. The goal is to please people who like power fantasies due to matters of taste and thematic preference, so there's nothing to do with this negative space in the narrative besides ignore it and move on to the next improperly structured conflict. Speaking of improper structure, let's talk about the arc which connects the two main conflicts of this episode. No, not Sushi, she's just a glorified quest giver. The main connective tissue is the fact that Toya can use any type of null magic. This whole episode, besides establishing the newest party member and giving our heroes an allyship with the Duke, existed to establish this aspect of the power fantasy and show what it could do. We learn in the beginning that it can copy any null magic another person has previously used. We then see him practicing some of them, then using a few of the spells to save the day the first time, and then we see him copying yet another spell to save the day again. So the first problem with this is that it's all redundancy. Everything there is to know about this power of his was learned at the very start. Everything else was just him using it some, like a bit. Don't get me wrong, it's good that they are using it at all, in the same way it's good that no one flubbed any voice lines, but it's not exactly substantive. Another problem is that the nature of this power is just so static. There's a pretty alright battle shown in anime called Battle Game in 5 Seconds, which has one season and cuts off right before it goes from alright to a masterpiece. Read the manga. But the main crux is that everyone in this story has their own special power, and our protagonist's power is whatever the other person thinks your power is. Now, I can go on tangents about how this creates tension because it is a weakness, but you already knew that that's a thing that this anime isn't going for. It is a power fantasy, it's not trying to make the hero weak. What's important here is that B5's version of you can use any ability requires some effort and setup, which makes it dynamic. When Akira tricks someone into thinking his power is some obscure thing they saw one time before, it feels, like he did something. It makes the hero more impressive, but it also just means that something is happening in the story. He tricked someone. That's interesting. Smartphone isekai could have done that. They could have had Toya have to, research in a library before he could use a spell, make it feel involved. But no, him curing the mom's blindness just kinda happens. The worst part about this, though, is that now he can just do anything. What can they even challenge him with? The answer is nothing. Not just from the perspective of a viewer who knows he'll always succeed, but even in universe. He has the you can use every power. I do want to give some praise to the story, though, because there is something it does right. Something that a lot of stories struggle with, especially stories that are trying to be subversive, is that they can have a hard time making a strong sense of morality for their characters. And that's something that's pretty important. We have a whole saying about saving cats in screenwriting for this very reason. Toya doesn't have much going on, but he does have a lot of save the cat moments. He's all about just helping people because they need help. That's not much for characterization, but it is useful, and, more importantly, everyone in the party rallies around this. When Yai is in danger, there's no waffling about, oh, should we intervene? Everyone's just on the same page. It's a cohesive party centered around the theme of helping people in need. And yeah, that's a really weak theme, but it is the story's main theme, and so far it is indeed built around. That is intentional, and it's effective. But there's a problem with that. Moving back to the first conflict that he solved, there's something about the whole execution of it that just feels off. Like, okay, to go into more detail, Lin wants to heal him, but she can't because there is an arrow lodged within him that is too deep. I don't know enough about healing magic to say if that makes sense or not, but whatever. The answer is obvious. Take the arrow out of their chest. The problem with this is that they don't. Toya does, but we don't get a scene of, I don't know, Lin being all, oh no, what will we do? And Elise being like, here, let me try using my hands to pull it out. You know, like her character would. Elise is the most outspoken member of the harem so far, and she has no issues being proactive. And it's not like she even has to succeed. Maybe it has barbs, and so pulling it out isn't possible without injuring him further, I don't know. That doesn't make much sense when you can just close wounds with magic, but it does make more sense than Elise's character just changing. The reason for this is because her character doesn't matter to this scene. This wasn't a problem that existed for her to solve, so she doesn't try and solve it. This is a product of a lot of things we can speculate about, such as an overfocus on the main character or just plain old sexism, but what I want to hone in on is the misunderstanding here of what a scene even is for. Scenes are not merely tools, they are mediums. If a scene exists to get something done, it needs to get that done by the characters moving through them. The scene and the character need to have harmony. If Elise is in the scene, then she should, ideally, get something out of it, even if that something is just her solidifying what her character is. But the author didn't ask what the scene could do for her. It asked what she could do for the scene. And since the scene was about Toya, the answer was nothing. The problem is that this scene will end, but Elise is going to keep being a part of the story. If we don't have a good understanding of who she is and how she'll act, if we don't understand and care about her, if she's not an entity in the story, that means that future scenes with her actually saying and doing things will feel less meaningful. The story ends on the note of the group going on their next adventure, but that just doesn't work here, because there's nothing to wrap up. Like, why have a scene checking in with the squad here? The story has nothing to do with them. It barely had anything to do with Toya. The entire emotional crux of the story had to do with Sushi and the people she wanted to save. Sure, Toya pressed the win button, and the other three were there for it, but what is there to reflect on? I don't think there's an issue with episodic stories which ultimately have to do with the people our heroes meet more than our heroes, but the heroes are the consistent part in those stories, and so they're the ones who wind up becoming the most interesting by the end if they are handled well. But these guys just aren't handled well. Yai, Lin, and Elise are inconsistently focused on, and so they feel like their characters haven't been properly established despite them being pretty simple characters. And Toya is just vapid. This story's soul is empty. If you want to see me continue losing my mind at this show, then like and subscribe with the notifications on, and if you want to support me, you can check out my Patreon. The link is in the description. And speaking of Patreon, I can't finish this video off without thanking my two lovely patrons. A big thank you to Carolyn Vig and The Bellman. I hope you two are having a wonderful day, and I hope you enjoy seeing this video a little bit early.